A billionaire pulls over on a frozen Vermont road. An old woman steps into his car, barefoot, silent. And sings the one lullaby only his mother ever knew. No name. No explanation. She vanishes before he can ask. But when he returns the next night, she's waiting. And she knows everything. His childhood secrets. His mother's hands. Even the name of a dog no one else could remember. What she reveals will tear his legacy apart. Rewrite the story of who he is. And uncover a love buried for nearly 70 years. He thought he knew where he came from. He was wrong. Something is waiting in the silence. And it's been watching him all his life. They said John Morgan had it all, and in the world's eyes, he did. He built an empire out of satin and silk, boutiques dotting the East Coast like pearls on a velvet thread. His name was whispered in high-rise boardrooms and charity auctions, etched in gold on cornerstones of fashion houses from Boston to D.C. But that night, that quiet, cold November night, none of it mattered. He was just a man behind the wheel, heading north. Windows cracked. Radio off. His tie loosened and slung across the dash like a forgotten snake. Vermont roads didn't speak much, and that was just how John liked it. The city noise wore on him. The flattery. The false smiles. He drove for the hush that only old trees and open sky could give a man who traded real things for beautiful ones. It was just past 11 when he saw her. At first, he thought it was a deer, maybe a bear. Shadows twist strange on Route 5 when your eyes are tired. But no. This was someone human, old, hunched, walking slow on the gravel shoulder. She had no bag. No flashlight. No sense of fear in her bones. He slowed the car to a crawl, rolled down the passenger window. "Ma'am. You all right out here?" She turned. And John's breath left him. There was something terribly familiar in that face, the shape of her jaw, the kindness in her eyes, the silver hair swept back like a photo in a long-lost locket. She didn't answer. Just opened the door and got in like she'd been expected. "Thank you," she said, her voice worn like linen in a cedar drawer. They drove in silence for a long while. John glanced at her now and then. She sat poised, hands folded neatly in her lap. Her coat was threadbare. Her shoes, there were none. Her feet were pale, dirt-smudged. "You live around here?" he asked gently. She nodded once. "Used to." It was then, just before the next turn, that she began to hum. Quiet at first. A melody. Sweet. Faint. Wistful. Then the words came. "Unforgettable, that's what you are." John's hand stiffened on the wheel. That song. His mother's voice. A memory he hadn't summoned in over 40 years. She used to sing it when he was ill, or afraid of thunder, or waking from a bad dream. His chest tightened. How do you know that?" he asked, eyes flicking between the road and the woman. She smiled. "I remember," she said. And then the tire blew. A deafening pop. The car shuddered. John cursed and pulled hard onto the shoulder. "Damn thing. Haven't had a flat in years." He stepped out, grabbing a flashlight from the trunk. Cold air met his face. The sky was cloudless. Not a single car had passed in 20 minutes. He worked quick. Years of country life had taught him to be practical. He didn't notice the silence behind him until he tightened the last lug nut. The passenger door stood open. Empty. "Ma'am," he called. No answer. He searched the tree line. Checked the ditch. Nothing. Just that hum of wind through brittle branches and the dull throb of panic in his neck. Gone. Just, gone. John stood there, breath steaming in the cold, flashlight sweeping left to right like a watchman's ghost. He waited another 10 minutes before getting back behind the wheel. The seat was still warm. He drove the last miles home without the radio. Without a word. Only when he pulled into the driveway did he see the blanket. Folded neatly on the back seat. Faded blue, with tiny embroidered white roses. And a small tag stitched into the corner. Property of Brattleboro General Hospital, maternity ward. John stared at it for a long time, until the frost crept thick across the windshield. He reached back, picked it up. The smell hit him like thunder. Lavender. And something else. Clove. Like the way his mother used to smell when she tucked him in, back when the world was small and safe. He walked inside, locked the door behind him, poured 2 fingers of bourbon, and didn't drink a drop. In his bedroom, the blanket lay across the foot of the bed. When he woke the next morning, it was still warm. Almost, breathing. The next day, John Morgan didn't go to the office. He didn't return calls. He didn't touch the bourbon on the kitchen shelf. He spent the morning staring out the window of his country home, that blanket folded neatly in his lap like a relic from another lifetime. He'd lived long enough to know not to chase ghosts. But some things, they didn't ask permission. They just came back, humming a tune you thought was buried 6 feet deep with time and reason. By sunset, he was behind the wheel again. Same road. Same hour. Same silence. He slowed near the bend. And sure enough, there she was. As if she'd never left. Standing on the shoulder, arms tucked into her sides, eyes locked on him long before the headlights found her. He stopped. This time, she didn't wait for an invitation. She opened the door and sat down, folding her hands just like before. "You came back," she said softly. John nodded, watching her. "I had to." She smiled. "I hoped you would." He swallowed. The air in the car was heavy, but not cold. It carried something he couldn't name, like the hush of a chapel, or the breath before truth. "I don't believe in ghosts," he muttered, pulling onto the road. "No one asks you to," she said. "But memory, now that's something different." He looked at her. Same clothes. Same bare feet. This time, she had a ribbon in her hand. Faded pink, curled at the edges. "You know who I am, don't you?" he asked. She didn't look at him. Just nodded once. "Jonathan Morgan," she said. "Born June 3, 1955. You liked to hide under the staircase during thunderstorms. Your first dog was a shepherd mix. You named him Captain. He used to sleep by your mother's slippers. And she sang to you. Unforgettable." The words floated again, slow as honey, thick as grief. John's knuckles whitened on the wheel. "Who are you?" he whispered. She looked at him then. For the first time, fully. "You already know." The road turned dark as they crossed the covered bridge past the river bend. The air grew colder. A full moon lit the frost on the branches. "You said you used to live out here," John said, voice hoarse. "I still do," she answered. "Follow the left fork. Up the hill. Past the red barn." He did. A small house came into view. Weathered white paint. Green shutters. Overgrown shrubs at the porch. Looked like it had been forgotten, like so many things out here, but not unloved. "Stop here," she said. John killed the engine. She got out, slow and graceful, and he followed without thinking. Inside, the place smelled like cedar and something sweeter, something familiar. On the table by the entryway sat a wooden bowl of wrapped caramels, just like his mother used to keep. He turned the corner. Stopped. Photographs. Lined the walls. Dozens of them. All black and white. Some yellowed with age. And in every one, a little boy. Him. In a paper sailor's hat. Sitting on a swing. Blowing out candles. Held in the arms of a woman not Helen Morgan. No. This one had warmer eyes. A softer jaw. A look that matched the stranger now placing her ribbon beside a photo frame. John stared. That's me. Yes. And that? She nodded. That's you, he whispered. The woman turned, and her face, though lined with age, held every echo of those pictures. I never stopped watching over you, she said. I just had to do it from the shadows. John stumbled back, shaking his head. My mother, Helen, she raised me. She did. And I owe her more than I can ever say. But she wasn't the one who carried you. Who sang to you when you were nothing more than a heartbeat. That was me, Jonathan. He couldn't breathe. You gave me away, he said, voice cracking. No, she whispered. I never wanted to. But she said she could give you a better life. That you'd be safe. That you'd never want. And I was nothing but a poor girl with a swollen belly and no name to offer. You let her take me. I begged her to let me stay close. But after you turned one, she said it was confusing. She sent me away. I worked the markets near your stores just to see you, once a week. From afar. Your suits. Your stride. I memorized it all. John collapsed into the chair by the window. Margaret knelt in front of him. I kept the ribbon from the hospital. Your birth ribbon. I saved every clipping I could find. When you made your first million, I cried. When your face showed up in the paper, I kissed the page. You were always my son, even if the world never knew it. Tears came then, slow, quiet ones, falling down the cheek of a man who hadn't cried since he was 10. I looked for you once, he said. After Helen passed. There was something missing. But no records. Nothing. Margaret took his hand. I was never listed. They sat there in silence. Two souls, finally breathing the same truth after half a century of lies. The wind knocked gently against the window. I don't know what to do with this, John whispered. Just sit with it, she said. That's all I ask. I didn't come to take anything. I came to give you back what you never knew you lost. John looked at her, this stranger, this mother, and for the first time, he didn't see a ghost. He saw home. John Morgan had always thought legacy was built on reputation, the storefronts, the stitched labels, the champagne galas. The Morgan name opened doors in New York, closed deals in Charleston. But now, back in that small house near Brattleboro, surrounded by fading photographs and the faint scent of clove and lavender, legacy meant something else. Blood. Truth. And the terrible ache of what could have been. For 2 days, John stayed in that cottage with Margaret. They didn't speak much. Didn't need to. She made coffee like his mother used to, thick and dark, with just a splash of condensed milk. She lit candles in the morning. Played old jazz records at dusk. When he looked at her, it wasn't with confusion anymore. It was with memory. But the world outside didn't sleep. On the third day, his assistant called. Mr. Morgan, are you all right? The board's growing restless. The New York Times wants confirmation about the rumored estate audit. Something about adoption records. Shall I issue a denial? John's blood turned to stone. The whispers had started. He hung up without answering. By noon, his lawyers were on his doorstep. They were clean-cut, confident, full of polite concern and sharp teeth. They didn't speak to Margaret directly. Didn't even look her way. John noticed that. He didn't forget. Jonathan, the senior partner began, we've received inquiries from several journalists, and frankly, the foundation's trustees are alarmed. There's talk of, how do I say this delicately, a woman claiming biological connection. She's not claiming, John replied calmly. She's telling the truth. The lawyer stiffened. Sir, that could have legal consequences. If the press ties your name to an illegitimate transfer of custody, it could reflect on the Morgan legacy. Especially if there's no documentation to support. There is no documentation, John interrupted. Because she was erased. One of the younger lawyers cleared his throat. May I speak frankly, sir? Do. If this woman is your biological mother, and if she was coerced or paid off, and that becomes public, the Morgan estate may be liable. And I'm afraid your adoptive mother's will, which left you everything, could be challenged. So what you're saying, John said, slow and cold, is that telling the truth could cost me everything. The lawyer nodded. Yes, sir. John stood. Then let it. They tried to protest. He didn't hear them. His mind was somewhere else. His birth certificate. It was time to look. That night, John drove to Boston. To the archives where the city kept its paper ghosts. He had to pull favors. Call in old debts. A record sealed since 1955 wasn't something easily accessed, but money still talked louder than silence. And there it was. Morgan, Jonathan, born June 3, 1955. Mother, Helen Morgan. Father, not applicable. No mention of Margaret. He sat there, the paper trembling in his hand. They scrubbed her out. The clerk, an old man with coffee breath and tired eyes, looked at him kindly. Happened more than you think, he said. Rich folks didn't like scandal. Servant girls with babies, they either disappeared or got paid to keep quiet. John said nothing. The man leaned in. But sometimes, they wrote the truth. Just didn't file it. He reached under the desk. Pulled out a yellowing folder with the corner torn. Unofficial birth registry. Never entered into the main record. He opened it. John stared. Morgan, Jonathan, born June 3, 1955. Mother, Margaret Wallace. Nurse's note, infant transferred to private guardian. Consent form signed under duress. No father listed. His hands shook. The truth had a name. And it wasn't Morgan. He returned to the cottage in silence. Margaret was in the garden, trimming a small rose bush that barely clung to life. She looked up as he walked toward her. You found it, she said, not as a question. John knelt down, holding out the paper. Your name should have been on this. Margaret touched the page but didn't take it. I never needed the world to know. I just wanted you to know. John looked down at the roses. They're barely blooming. They bloom enough, she said. Even things forgotten by the world can find light again. That night, John called a press conference. Not a boutique unveiling. Not a gala. No red carpet. Just a room. A podium. A microphone. And the truth. He read the registry. Showed the ribbon. Told the story, every brutal, honest piece of it. The scandal. The shame. The silence. And the woman who watched her son from behind glass her entire life. He ended with one sentence. I am the man I am because two women loved me. One gave me a name. The other gave me life. And starting today, I honor them both. The world reacted, as it always does, half applause, half knives. But John didn't care. He filed to change his legal name to Jonathan Wallace Morgan. His attorneys fought to have Margaret listed as his biological mother in court. And when the judge asked why, John simply said, so her name won't die in silence. That winter, John moved Margaret into his estate. She didn't want it. He insisted. She took only 3 things, a photograph, her hospital ribbon, and the blanket. The one she'd left in his car. There's a certain silence that only winter can bring. A heavy, thoughtful kind. The kind that makes a man face himself in the mirror with no lies left to hide behind. That was the silence that filled John Morgan's Vermont home now, Margaret sitting by the window, knitting something soft and blue, and John standing at the fireplace with a legal envelope in hand. The lawyer's voice had been calm, almost apologetic, when he called that morning. "We've reviewed the full contents of Helen Morgan's will, sir. There's a clause you should see." Now the fire crackled behind him. The pages sat on the mantel. And Margaret, the woman he now introduced as mother to every visitor, looked up from her knitting and said, "If it's bad news, I've heard worse." John read it aloud. "Should my son, Jonathan Morgan, alter or contest the official terms of his guardianship, or associate the Morgan estate with any unsanctioned claims of biological heritage, the estate shall be partially liquidated and redistributed to the Morgan Trust for philanthropic continuity, excluding him from primary control." He let the words hang there, like frost on a windowpane. Margaret put her knitting down. She knew. She planned for this, John said, bitter. Even in death, she wanted control. But Margaret shook her head. No. She feared it. She was afraid of you remembering. Afraid of losing you, even after she was gone. She already had everything, John whispered. Why wasn't that enough? Margaret stood, walked to him, and placed her hand over his. Because love born from fear turns to possession. And possession don't leave room for truth. The Board of Trustees met in New York that Friday. A room of dark suits and shallow hearts. They smelled the blood in the water. "Jonathan," one trustee said, "we respect your emotional journey. But as fiduciaries, we must protect the foundation. And this clause means you want to take it all away," John finished. Another man adjusted his cufflink. "Not take. Reassign. You could retain an advisory role. But we believe it's in the best interest of the Morgan brand to separate personal controversy from professional leadership." John leaned forward, hands steepled. "Did any of you ever meet my mother?" They blinked. "Helen Morgan?" He shook his head. "No. My mother." They didn't answer. He continued. "She raised me from behind a booth. Sold scarves she stitched by hand just to be near me. She remembered every birthday, every press interview, every new store I opened. She gave up her name, her rights, her voice. And she did it so a boy could grow up with something she never had, a chance." He rose. "If you think for 1 second I'll sit at the head of a table that denies her dignity, then take the table." He walked out. By Monday, he'd resigned. That winter was the quietest he ever lived. He woke early. Helped Margaret cook breakfast. He took her to church on Sundays. Walked her through the snow when her bones ached. And every afternoon at 4, they sat by the radio and listened to Ella Fitzgerald. Unforgettable. Some days, she'd hum along. Some days, she just smiled and closed her eyes. One morning in March, Margaret didn't wake. John found her still, peaceful, her hands folded like she was ready to meet something sacred. She'd left no letter, no instructions. Just a photo. Him, age 5. Her, behind a market stall. She was looking at the camera, but her eyes were fixed on him. He buried her beside Helen. No fanfare. Just family. And on the stone, he wrote. Margaret Wallace Morgan. Mother. Watcher. Unforgettable. Weeks passed. Then one day, in his mailbox, he found an envelope sealed in deep green wax. Inside was a copy of a revised will, Helen Morgan's. Stamped and notarized, 1 week before her death. A second clause. Unseen. Unfiled. It read. If Jonathan should ever find the truth of his birth, let him not curse my silence. Let him know I loved him more than my name, more than my legacy. But I feared losing him to the very love he was born from. If he forgives me, then let this will be null and void, and let him have it all. John sat on the porch, the snow melting around his boots, and wept. The boutique empire was gone. John had sold it all within a year. Every store. Every showroom. Every gold-plated hanger with his name etched into the hook. People called it a scandal, a breakdown, a slow unraveling of a great man. But John Morgan knew better. It was a return. He'd built a life from silk and shadows. Then he found the woman behind the curtain and chose, finally, to walk in the sun. Now, he lived quiet. In a small white house not far from Brattleboro. The same one where Margaret once folded laundry and played Ella Fitzgerald until dusk. He tended the garden. He fixed shutters when the wind kicked them loose. On Saturdays, he helped the church repair its steps. He'd never known peace like this. But one ritual never changed. Every week, without fail, he drove up the hill to the cemetery. He parked beside two side-by-side stones, Helen Morgan and Margaret Wallace Morgan. He would stand, hands in his pockets, and speak like both women were listening, because part of him believed they were. Some days, he brought flowers. Other days, just a chair and silence. And then came that day. The day of the promise. It had been 5 years since Margaret passed. The hill was blooming early that spring. Crocuses pushing through snow like hope itself. John laid a folded blanket on the bench. The blanket. The one left in his car that strange night. He sat between the graves. Looked from one name to the other. And then he spoke. I was angry at you both, he said softly. Helen, because you lied. Margaret, because you let her. But over time, I've come to understand something neither of you ever said out loud. He paused, running a hand over Helen's stone. You both loved me the only way you knew how. A breeze picked up. The trees swayed like old listeners leaning in. I used to think legacy was about what I owned. What I wore. But you taught me different. You taught me legacy is about what you leave in someone's soul. The way you look at them when they're broken. The way you show up even when the world tells you not to. He looked at Margaret's name then. You could have stayed away. Most would have. But you didn't. You watched me rise. You watched me fall. And in the end, you gave me something no man had ever given me. He paused. A mother. John took a breath. Then reached into his coat pocket and pulled out 2 envelopes. One addressed to Mother. One to Mom. He placed each beneath a stone. And then, he knelt. His knees cracked, but he didn't care. He pressed his palm to the earth between them and whispered. I promise you both this. I'll live the rest of my days loving someone like you loved me. Patient. Quiet. Fierce. And I'll tell them your names. Both of them. So you'll never be forgotten. The breeze shifted. It carried a smell. Lavender. And clove. John froze. His eyes scanned the cemetery. No one. Then he looked down. The blanket on the bench was gone. In its place, a small, folded piece of music sheet. Just 5 bars of handwritten notes. And the title. Unforgettable, key of C, arranged for one voice. He picked it up. Heart thudding like a boy on Christmas Eve. And for the first time in decades, he sang. Soft. Shaky. But full of truth. Years later, John would pass on in his sleep. Peaceful. No pain. Just breath leaving like a whisper through leaves. They buried him right there, between Helen and Margaret. On his stone, they wrote the words he'd chosen long ago. Jonathan Wallace Morgan. Son. Builder. Believer in love. And every spring, when the crocuses bloom, townsfolk still say they hear music on the hill. A single voice. Soft as memory. Singing a song that never dies. Unforgettable, that's what you are. Write in the comments where you're from, let's see how far these stories can spread. And of course, subscribe so you don't miss new exciting stories. See you soon.